Tonight, a brutal crackdown against anti-Putin protesters. This new video that we just have into CNN, as you can see, shows violent clashes. This is what's happening on the streets of the capital of Georgia, Tbilisi, filled with tear gas, protesters shooting fireworks at police. Some of the stories that have been described about how protesters are being treated are foul. Anti-Putin protesters have now been clashing with police for 6 straight days. And Matthew Chance is out front.
Another night of mayhem on the streets of Tbilisi. The capital of the former Soviet Republic of Georgia is now torn between Russia and the West. Protesters here furious. Their government, seen as increasingly close to the Kremlin, is delaying further talks to join the European Union.
We should be the members of the European family, and unfortunately our government tries the best not to let us and not to allow us.
I think the Georgian government thinks that Georgia is Russian and we will act as the Russian peoples do, and no one will come out in the street if others are beaten, if others are disrespected. But they are wrong in this, This is Georgia, and Georgian people are not like that.
For years now, the conservative ruling party, the Georgian Dream, has denied any formal links with the Kremlin. But by passing repressive laws, like limiting civil society and gay rights, similar to those in Russia, it's thrown into question the country's future with the West. Over in Ukraine, a daily sobering reminder for Georgians of the price of defying Moscow. Georgia suffered a brief war of its own with Russia in 2008, but avoiding this devastation of their Ukrainian neighbours, in a conflict that began with a popular uprising known as the Maidan, is what the Georgian ruling party says now justifies its crackdown.
So the attempt to organize the Maidan in Georgia is already over. I would call everybody to keep quiet, let's say, and to keep peace in this country. So we are responsible for that. I can assure everybody that there will be peace in this country.
But that's not how it looks on the streets of the Georgian capital, with police and pro-Western protesters outside the embattled parliament in what looks like a pivotal standoff. Matthew Chance, CNN London.
Let's talk about the security of Europe and Putin and Ukraine. That's the big issue out there right now. In your book, you write about Trump's negotiation to get US troops out of Afghanistan. And you essentially say that the way it was done, with no communication with the Afghan government, only with the Taliban, the fate of Afghanistan was sealed. That essentially Afghanistan was given back to the Taliban. So everybody's trying to figure out, what is Trump going to do when he says, I can end the war in Ukraine in 24 hours or whatever? What do you think, knowing what you know about this particular individual and knowing what you know about Putin, how do you think under these two presidents that war is going to be ended?
Ich sag mal, dieser Krieg ist ein solches Leid.
This war is such an incredible suffering for the Ukrainian population, and President Zelensky proved to be so courageous when on the day of the aggression happened, didn't leave the country, didn't flee, but stayed in the country and is fighting ever since for a sovereign Ukraine. I don't want to speculate. I don't want to say I can compare this with Afghanistan. I can only say the result of Afghanistan was a disaster, because once you have an elected government, such as the Afghan government, and not include them into such negotiations, so basically give to those who actually violate human rights every day, and give them power of attorney, so to speak, then later on they have all the possibilities at their disposal to set the conditions. There was no internal peace process in Afghanistan due to this, and President Biden actually accepted that and that result of the negotiations, and we saw that this didn't mean anything good for the Afghan people, even until today. But in Ukraine, well, it will depend on how Europe will this is sort of due to my successor, how Europe will position itself. I can't say anything on this now.
Okay. Do you think, as people have said, that had you accepted in 2007 or 6, I can't remember when, but there was that specific NATO summit, Ukraine and Georgia into NATO, this war would not have happened?
Nein, das denke ich
No.
gerade nicht.
No, that's exactly what I don't think. I also described this, and it was 2008 in Bucharest. Actually, this was not about NATO membership, but it was the sort of precursor to that, a membership action plan. And we knew from the accession of the Baltic countries and from the accession of other countries that this usually takes 3 to 5 years. And during those years, they're not protected by the NATO umbrella. I was firmly convinced that Putin would not sort of allow this to happen without taking action. So I thought it was wrong to actually put this on the agenda at the time, particularly since the Ukrainian people were split right down the middle, since the Russian fleet was actually located in the Black Sea, and there was a negotiation we had and a contract we had with Russia. So it was not the right point in time. I was actually not the only one who thought that this was wrong and that the point in time was wrong. The Central and Eastern Europeans wanted to be protected and therefore supported Ukraine, but we at the time, that would have led Ukraine into a vulnerable exposure. I would have loved to have a road taken by them that now has been taken by Finland and Sweden, and that they would then later on start to accede to NATO.
Even in negotiations, the Ukrainian politicians, whether it's President Zelensky or others, say, well, how can we negotiate with a liar? He says one thing and does another thing. In your book, you write point blank that Putin told you a brazen lie when you confronted him about Russian troops inside Crimea and eastern Ukraine in 2014. And he also at one point told you, look at what's happening in Ukraine. This is the 2004 revolution, the Orange Revolution. I will never allow that to happen. How can anybody negotiate with somebody who you yourself, who knew Putin pretty well, calls a brazen liar?
Ja, also ich hatte diesen Punkt am Anfang meiner...
Well, at the beginning of my work as Federal Chancellor, that was not what he did. He did not say these brazen lies. But later on Crimea, he did admit that he had lied. And there was a turning point in our relationship, quite clearly, that I had to be extremely cautious in my approach towards him. So you cannot only trust in an agreement with him, that's absolutely correct. So we have to give to Ukraine, in which form whatsoever, security guarantees, very clear and absolutely reliable guarantees, as we gave them when they said we're going to dispense with our nuclear power at the time. But Ukraine cannot be left without any security guarantee in what maybe we think is a peace. In my book, I write quite clearly that apart from the military support for Ukraine, it is very important to also think now of how a diplomatic solution can look like after the end of the war.